Hello, everybody. Hi. I'm gonna just wait till everybody comes on. All right. So good evening and welcome, everybody. I'm going to get us started with our program tonight. We ask that you keep your cameras on, so please turn them on if you can, but your mics muted throughout the event. Up until the very end, when we'll tell you to turn the mics on. So my name is Esther Kutash, and I am the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. Thank you all for being here. Tonight is our fourth time that we're hosting the Yellow Candle program, and it is so special to see all of you again this year and so many new faces as well. The Yellow Candle Project came to us through Denny Shaw. Hi, Denny, and thank you for doing that. Denny brought this program opportunity to our attention in 2020 when the world was shut down and we could not gather in person for Yom HaShoah. We continue this program even today because we realize that there are many families who cannot participate in our community gatherings that we offer at the Horowitz-Wasserman Holocaust Memorial Plaza. At the end of our 45-minute program today, we will light our candles together. After our program, we ask that you take a picture of your lit candles to share on your social media pages. We're putting the appropriate hashtags and other information to use for this post in the chat right now, and we will do it again and prompt you again towards the end of the program. As you all know, each year during Yom HaShoah, we remember the 6 million Jewish lives lost and honor the resilience of the survivor community. Our calling today to remember the Holocaust should be stronger than ever. We now have less than 350,000 survivors still among us, and we're living at a time when anti-Semitism is rising globally. As a community, we must come together to fight hate and bigotry in all of its forms. It is a pledge that we have now made generations ago, but it is a commitment that we must fill with new energy and meaning today. So in that spirit tonight, we welcome several partners and presenters to this program, both local friends from the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center, 3J Philly, Rodeph Shalom, as well as partners from farther away, namely Art and Remembrance from Baltimore. Our focus tonight in our program is Holocaust-related art, both art that originate from the time of the Holocaust, as well as art that was created later to express personal experiences, including feelings about oppression, humiliation, and loss. It was also a lot of the times to express resilience and hope and healing from trauma. So without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Bernice Steinhardt, who will talk about her late mother, Esther Niesenthal-Krinitz's artwork. Esther's artwork is exhibited at the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. It is a series of 36 embroidered story quilts. Both Esther's story of survival as well as her artistic expression is nothing short of incredible. And nobody shares Esther's story better than her daughter, Bernice, who started the organization Art and Remembrance to ensure that Esther's amazing art and story captures the hearts and minds of generations to come. So please welcome the wonderful Bernice Steinhardt to our program tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor for me to be here, to be able to share with you something of my mother's art and story. If we can go to the first slide. I just want to give you a visual now to give you some idea of what my mother's artwork looks like. But I wanted to give you some background about her as well. My mother was 12 years old in 1939 when the Germans occupied Poland, and they came straight to her little village of Nishik in the center of Poland. And they occupied it for 3 years. And then in October 1942, they ordered all the Jews to report to a nearby train station. My mother refused to go, and she was 15 then. She took her 12-year-old sister, her 13-year-old sister, sorry, and the two of them said goodbye to their family, and they never saw them again. So all my life, I heard my mother's stories about her childhood and her survival, because unlike many other Holocaust survivors, my mother could not keep from telling her story. But when she was about 50, she decided that she wanted me and my sister to see what her home and her family looked like. She had never been trained in art. She never even ever thought of herself as an artist, but she could sew anything. So she took a large piece of fabric and she filled it in with stitches. And the next slide, please. And this is the first picture that she did. In the lower corner on the left, you can see my mother walking up from the river carrying a pair of buckets of water over her shoulders. Her sister Manya is waiting at the top of the hill. And next to the house are her father, her two younger sisters, and her brother. And this is in 1938. And she said this was a happy time for her. Everybody was happy then. Next slide, please. This is another one of the pictures from before the war. I'm going to show you all these pictures in chronological order, but she actually created them in what I call psychological order. So this picture, which is also in 1938, is Shavuos, on the occasion of Shavuos. And it's one of the later pictures that she did, but of an earlier time. And here she and her brother and sisters are going to their grandparents' house and walking, and my mother's brother, Reuven, had made a pair of stilts. And so here my mother is walking on the stilts through the wheat field on the way to the grandparents' house. My mother used the colors of borders to kind of mark different periods of time. So all the pictures from before and after the war have different colors, as distinguished from the pictures during the war years, which are all bordered in black. This is the only picture in which she actually embroidered in the border, because she just loved, I think she loved this wheat motif so much that she couldn't keep from spilling it over onto the border. Next picture, please. This is now September 1939, the beginning of the war. And as I said earlier, as soon as the Germans invaded Poland, they came straight to my mother's village. And here my mother and two of her friends are standing on the left, at the left corner, watching as one of this initial patrol of soldiers rides into the village and pulls her grandfather off the steps of his house and cuts off his beard as my mother looks on. And this is how the war began for my mother. And it was the beginning of the years of terror that were to follow. Next slide, please. This is now June 1941. By this point, things were growing gradually worse and worse for the Jews during the occupation. And by this point, Jews were no longer allowed to own livestock, which was a tremendous disruption and hardship for my mother's family. Her father was a horse trader, and her mother used to sell poultry at market. So they could no longer do what they did to help support the family. So here, my mother and her sister went to work for Polish farmers, neighbors, as farmhands. And here they decided on this beautiful day in June to take their cows to the good pasture near the Vistula River. And when they got there, my mother could see that they were next to what had been a a prison camp at Yanishev, it was called, but had been converted to a slave labor camp for young Jewish men and boys. And as my mother looked on, she could see the brutality, the conditions to which these prisoners were subjected. And when they were no longer able to work, my mother could see that they were, there was one boy in the lower left who is being led into the birch forest and shot. My mother said there were shots ringing all the time that they stood there. But this picture, when I saw, of course, I loved each of the pictures that my mother made, but when I saw this picture, I was literally awestruck. I felt that this picture captures the full experience of what war was like for those who tried to survive it. On the one side, life continued, and it was a beautiful day in June, and the grass, this thick, lush grass is growing, the trees have fruit, the flowers are blooming. And on the other side is the almost colorlessness of this brutality and terror of this slave labor camp. And this was the experience of war to its survivor. Next slide, please. This is now October 15th, 1942, the morning of that day. The Jews had all been ordered to leave their homes at 10 o'clock that morning and report to the train station, in the nearest train station in the city of Krasnik. My mother refused to go. All night long, she begged her father to think of, the night before, to think of a farmer, a friend of his, that they could go to, a Pole. They were accustomed to working as farmhands, and my mother's idea was that they could go to a friend of their father's and find work with him. And so my grandfather finally came up with a name, Stefan, in Dombrova, the village of Dombrova. So my mother determined that she and Manya were going to go to Stefan's house. Their mother, so here they are on that morning, everybody is crying. This is one of the earliest pictures my mother did. And you can see, if you notice, you'll see how much simpler the artistry is in this picture. She hadn't learned perspective yet. That was still to come. So you can see as the pictures, as we go on back and forth, you can see those that are later, those that are earlier. But here they're saying goodbye. Everyone's crying. And as I said earlier, this was the last time that they saw their family. So next picture, please. Their mother had paid a neighbor to take Manya and Esther to Stefan's house in Dombrova. And the neighbor came for them, and she took them to her sister's house, and she told them to wait there for her. And she left. And my mother was waiting and waiting and waiting. And then she started getting very nervous because there was a bounty for turning in Jews. And you could get sugar or kerosene, something of value. So my mother was worried that this neighbor was going to turn them in. And so she took Manya and they left and went to the road, the main road, and joined the procession of Jews on their way to Krasnik. They saw their cousin Dina, who is in this picture, walking along the road with her baby. And at this point, though, in the picture, my mother realizes that they're coming, they will soon arrive in Krasnik. And she just couldn't bear the thought of continuing on. And she started to pull Manya off the road. Manya did not want to go with her. Manya had actually never wanted to go with Esther in the first place. She wanted to stay with the rest of the family. But it was their mother who told Manya, go with Esther. And now when Esther wants to leave the road, Manya wants to stay with Dina it's Dina who tells Manya, go with Esther. I've always said that my aunt survived because she listened, and my mother survived because she didn't. Next slide, please. So here they arrive at Stefan's house, and they throw themselves into his arms and they say, please help us. We're Hersh's daughters. Please help us. And he calms them down and he tells them he'll take care of them. And he puts them up into his attic where they're stringing tobacco leaves. And after a couple of days, when they come down, they can see that they come down for breakfast, but they see that their bags, their baskets are packed. And he tells them, my dear children, I can't keep you here any longer. Everyone in Nishik knows that you're here. If the Germans come, they'll kill me, they'll kill you, they'll burn down my farm. You have to leave. So he sends them out into the pouring rain, and they walk along this muddy, wet road until they come to the forest. And there they hang up their boots to dry. And while they're in the forest, my mother realizes that they can't survive as Hersh's daughters anymore. And so she makes up these new identities for them as these two Polish Catholic farm girls from, their names are Maria and Josefina Grochowiecka, and they come from a town on the other side of the Vistula River. They've been separated from their family. They're looking for work. So first they come to one village, but people want papers. They want to see papers. So they have to leave, and they go to another village. They have to leave there until finally they come to a village where, the village of Grabówka, where no one asks them for papers, and people are willing to take them in. Next slide, please. So this is now the farm where my mother found refuge. The farmer there, who's in the lower left-hand corner, was elderly and his wife was infirm, so he needed a lot of help on his farm. And here my mother had planted a garden. She cooked for him. She cleaned his house. She grew vegetables, tended his fields. And one day, these two German soldiers came trampling through her garden, trying to talk to her. She had to pretend that she couldn't understand what they were saying, and she just kept her head low. And but she was very worried, as you can imagine, when suddenly all the bees that her farmer kept started swarming around the soldiers. You can see in the background there are these beehives. And the bees, my mother never understood exactly why they came out of the hives, but she thought maybe they recognized strangers. But at any rate, they came out of the hives and started swarming around the soldiers, who eventually had to leave. They were just driven off. And my mother always used to say that this was the day that the bees saved her, because they could do what no one else could do, which was to drive off the Germans. Next slide, please. So in 1944, in July of 1944, the tides of war had turned and the Russians were coming through Poland, moving steadily westward towards Germany. And so they, of course, liberated the village of Grabówka. And a couple of months later, when the battles had moved on further west, my mother decided it was safe to return to Mniszek, her home, and find out and see if anyone else had returned. So when she arrived there, she asked her Polish neighbors what had happened to the Jews. There were no Jews, there was no family, there were no other Jews that were left in the village or the nearby town. And no one knew exactly what had happened to them. But one of her Polish neighbors thought that maybe they had been taken to this concentration camp in Lublin called Majdanek. So my mother went to Majdanek in search of signs of her family. And here you see her arriving at the gates to Majdanek. This is a very, very large camp. It's spread out over a large area, but my mother compressed all the major features of the camp into this one picture. And so she included the gas chambers and the crematorium. In the back of the picture is this field of giant cabbages growing on a bed of human ashes. And after my mother got this tour, the Russian army had liberated the camp. So it was soldiers who gave her the tour. She joined the Polish army, which was then under Red Army command. And she was 17 years old, and she went with them to Berlin. Next slide, please. So when the war ended, my mother went back to Poland to get Manya, and then the two of them went back to Germany to the American zone, and they went to a DP, or a displaced persons camp in the American zone. And that's where my mother met my father, who was also a Polish survivor. My aunt met her husband, who is likewise a Polish survivor. They all got married in the camp, and there were many weddings in this camp of young people so eager, anxious to start their lives again. And my father, then after they were married and my mother got pregnant, my father didn't want me to be born in the DP camp, so he left to go to work in Belgium while they waited for their papers to come through, because my father had relatives in New York who were sponsoring his immigration. So here now, finally, we do arrive in New York. My father's cousin, Clara, came to meet us. She had helped arrange for our sponsorship. And as the adults looked on at the Statue of Liberty at the entrance to New York Harbor, I'm sleeping on my father's shoulder, and Clara looks over to me. My mother includes this in the caption, and she says, "My dear child, this will be your America." And of course, this is the American ideal, the dream of America that we still hopefully share today, although in recent times that ideal has been challenged as people come to our shores and are turned away. But here you can see the sky is wide open, and there's a feeling of safety and an opportunity in this picture. Next slide, please. What I've shown you is really just a sort of sample of the images, maybe a third of them, because there are actually 36 pictures that my mother did altogether. This is a photograph from the gallery where they're all displayed now in Baltimore at the American Visionary Art Museum. And I hope that, given its proximity, I hope that you get a chance to see the artwork in person, because even though the images convey beautifully, I think, on screen, there is nothing like seeing them in person and having a sense of the scale. This picture, I think, gives you a sense of the scale of the images, but to be able to see the artwork close up and the stitching in the pictures is really stunning. And of course, I was totally enchanted by this recreation of my mother's childhood home in the center of the gallery, the home that you saw in the very first slide. Next picture, please. This is, for those of you who perhaps can't get to Baltimore, this is a video tour that you can find on our website. It's a series of 36 short videos. They're a minute long that I narrate about each of the images that each of the pictures that my mother created. So you can get to see it close up on screen. And they're actually beautifully presented in sort of a motion perspective. And next slide, please. I wanted to bring this up again because it has our website address, artandremembrance.org. I hope you do get a chance to go to the website. We have, in addition to the video tour, we have a considerable body of resources there, including very robust lesson plans for students from 5th through 12th grades, and as well as, of course, images of all of the artwork, and a link to a 30-minute video called Through the Eye of the Needle, which includes interviews with my mother, my sister and me, and other expert commentators. That's a beautiful award-winning film. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. So with that, I'm going to stop here and thank you once again for joining me on this incredible remembrance, this evening, this day of remembrance. My mother created these pictures really simply to share them with me and my sister because she wanted to preserve her memories of her family and to pass them along to her children and grandchildren, the family that she created. And so it is my great honor and privilege on this day of all days to be able to share them with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bernice. I stopped sharing my screen. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Sophie Dunn. I'm the Senior Manager of Programs and Operations for the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. And I'm so pleased to see so many familiar faces and some new faces on the Zoom call. First and foremost, I want to thank Bernice for this presentation. We've been working with Bernice for more than a year now, and every time I hear your mother's story and look at the artwork, I'm totally captivated. They're really incredible. And Esther and I had the privilege to go to the Visionary Art Museum and see the works in person, and I really recommend, if you have the ability to get down there, to go and see them because they really are incredible. So thank you, Bernice, for being with us and for sharing Art and Remembrance's work. So I'm thank you. I'm now going to introduce Katie Lowe, who's the Program and Collections Director for the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center. And the center is located in Elkins Park and has a pretty amazing collection. I definitely recommend going and visiting it as well. The center's been a partner with our foundation on a number of programs, which includes an in-person panel on resistance during the Holocaust tomorrow with Rodeph Shalom, who's another partner on this program tonight. So we'll be putting the link to that for registration information in the chat if you're interested in going. And we'll also be doing an in-person family commemoration for Yom HaShoah this upcoming Sunday with Hammock and with Katie. At the Holocaust Memorial Plaza downtown. So I'll put the link for both of those programs into the chat. But this center has an invaluable collection of artifacts, many from local survivors. And so I'm going to turn it over to Katie to tell us about a few things in particular and a little bit more about the collection. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Katie Lau. Like Sophie said, I'm with the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center. Yeah, we are a fantastic institution. I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit about the museum and the work that we do, and particularly with the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. So we've been around since the 60s. we were founded by a survivor whose name was Yaakov Riz. He was actually one of the first survivors to develop an institution specifically with the intention of collecting and sharing the history of the Holocaust. And his museum was started in his basement. He had no real support for telling the story. I'm sorry, I live on a busy street. I'm not sure if you can hear that. He had no real support for doing the work that he wanted to do at the time that the museum started. And over the years, it's grown to be a real labor of love and a real community effort. So what we're most well known for is our Speakers Bureau, and that is a fantastic coalition of survivors, descendants, who go out of their way to go share their family stories, mostly in schools, middle school and high schools. And I believe Esther was talking earlier about the decreasing number of survivors who are able to share their stories and do the good work in the community. So we are so blessed to have an incredible relationship with descendant speakers, increasingly second and third G. As Sophie mentioned, we also have an incredible collection that I'm really proud to care for. Before we were in the location that we're in now, which is in Knesset, Israel, Reform KI, we were at Klein Life. I'm not sure if anybody ever went to see our exhibit in Klein Life, but it's changed quite a bit since then. Looks like Stephanie's been. Yeah, what I like to say about our museum is that we are a survivors museum. So there are pieces in our collection that are related to the sufferings of the Holocaust, the reality of how horrific it truly was. But first and foremost, we're telling the stories of survival, of survivorship. And we really put front and center the stories of Philadelphia area survivors who have been so wonderful to share their stories with us. And it's a real blessing to talk not only about their lives and what they experienced pre-Holocaust and during the Holocaust, but the lives they've built here in this community after the fact. So yeah, it's a real joy to do the work that we do. It's a joy to do it with Sophie and with PHRF and Esther. That's really the best spiel I've got for the museum. Sophie, did you want me to talk any more about art? Yes? Okay, so I have a small presentation about art and the Holocaust. I'm going to try to fly through it as best as I possibly can because it's already 7:05. I've got it pretty short anyway. So we're going to start from the current slide. And Sophie, I can share my screen, right? Okay. Can everybody see this okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Yes, okay. So I'm going to really briefly just talk about art and the Holocaust. Specifically, I want to talk about why people created art during the Holocaust. I think the most obvious answer to that question is that art is a very uniquely human act. And if we're talking about a group of people who are forcibly having their humanity taken from them, this is a really vital and important way to resist that act and to assert humanity. But there are a few frameworks that I kind of want to touch on here for understanding some of the art that we're going to look at. And these are escapism, processing, and documentation. And by framework, what I'm talking about here are three other reasons besides the assertion of humanity why people may have been making the art that they were making, and so how we can sort of retroactively understand that art. And so those three are escapism, processing, and documentation. We'll start with escapism, and here we're going to look at a lot of artwork created by children. This piece is created by Nellie Toll, who actually was local. She passed a few years ago, but she wound up settling in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and continued her art as an adult. Her pieces are very well known. We actually have 2 prints of her pieces in our collection, which she has signed and annotated. Nellie was 8 years old when she went into hiding with her mother, Roja. And at the time, her mother gifted her a gouache set, which is what you see here. And the whole time that she was in hiding, she created these beautiful, vibrant, colorful, natural landscapes that featured themes of young girlhood and humanity and joy and life. This is one of the most well-known girls in the field. She painted this in 1943. There's another one here, two friends, mother and governess, and mother's three children. Again, we see them similar themes here of nature, family, girlhood. These are all things that she didn't really have access to when she was in hiding. She was only with her mother. Her brother had been killed. Her father had been deported. So this was her trying to access these things that she could no longer really have in her real life. The next pieces we're going to look at here are all created by children from the Theresienstadt ghetto. Perhaps the most well-known element or fact about Theresienstadt was that it was built to be this sort of model ghetto, and as such, and as a tool for propaganda. So as such, a lot of very famous Czech Jews were deported there, including artists, including the artist Friedel Dicker Brandeis, who from 1943 to 1944 ran an art school for the young kids who were also interned there. So all of the pieces you're going to see were created in that art school, including this one titled Dream by Helena Mendlova. While it's very different in style from Nellie's pieces, it's got a lot of similar themes, particularly nature. This is a beautiful landscape with trees and bushes and a clear night sky, things that Helena could not access while she was in Theresienstadt. I think the coolest thing about this piece is the actual medium. So you can see that it's a paper collage, but the papers themselves are old forms that the individuals were forced to fill out when they were first brought into the ghetto. And she's repurposed them here to create this beautiful art. Again, we have an element of fantasy here of escapism, heads, trees, fruits, house. This is another young child thinking about things that they can no longer have access to: home, fresh food, nature, their family. And we have the bright colors here again. This one hits me really hard. I'm not quite sure why. It's very simple. But again, those same themes of nature and home. And really what we see here across all of these three pieces are young people trying to process their new realities and the loss of what they'd known before. On the theme of processing, we're going to move on now to talk a little bit more about processing itself, but particularly among adults. So in a lot of the adult artwork that we see coming out of the Holocaust, we see a lot of self-portraits, and it sort of makes sense because in adulthood, you have a more developed sense of self to feel you have lost, as opposed to a young person who's really thinking about the loss of their comforts, of their family, of their childhood home. So one very well-known one that we have here is created by Joseph Kauner. He created this while he was interned in the Lodz ghetto, and he was one of the very few people who was actually financially supported by the head of the Judenrat. He's also one of the very few people we'll discuss today who survived their experience during the Holocaust. He was deported to a camp at one point, but survived it, and all of his artwork was later saved by a friend and returned to him. We have another portrait here. I just love this. This is actually crayon on paper. This is created by Charlotte Salomon while she was in hiding in South France. Very different from Kauner's, but again, we have very vibrant colors, a clear expression of a sense of self. Charlotte was later deported to Auschwitz and murdered along with her husband, but her sketches remain, and this is one of the very beautiful pieces that we have access to now. So now we have a very different type of processing. This is less a self-portrait and more sort of a meditation on an experience. So Felix Nussbaum, the artist here, he created this piece in 1939. And the 4 years previously, he had spent as a refugee fleeing around Europe, trying to find refuge somewhere. As we all know, the Jewish experience in Europe before World War II was also horrific. 1939, we know what was going on then. We can imagine how difficult his existence must have been at this point. This is him meditating on his existence as a refugee unable to find refuge in his home. So we have themes of isolation, depression, desperation, and impending doom, as well as some really obvious imagery going on here. The globe in the foreground. This is another piece I really wanted to include here. So again, this is from Theresienstadt. This is a quite famous piece of satire. It's a satire of Adolf Hitler, obviously. And I find it really important to put in here because it illustrates the ways in which processing and resistance can also take the form of something a little bit harsher, a little bit sharper like this. So even amongst all of this pain, we have a really clear piece of resistance art here. This is clearly meant to mock Hitler. They have him in a clown costume, which is rumpled. We can see a broken bottle of wine or alcohol, some kind of liquor on the ground in front of him. It's called "The Song Is Over," so it's meant to illustrate Hitler's downfall. I think that this is a really important element of processing, which is the rage, which is the anger, the desire to push back to some extent. The last sort of Holocaust art I want to talk about here is documentation. So the last two pieces we're going to see here is art that was specifically created to document the horrors that were being forced upon the Jewish people. This one I think is really interesting. So Lipschitz created this while he was in the Kovna ghetto. He was part of a coalition of artists who were secretly creating art to document what was happening to them so that nobody could deny it later in the future. This is his brother. I think what's really interesting about this piece is the brutality is the focus, and yet at the same time, he has named his brother in the title. So while the brutality takes the humanity away, the name gives it back. Finally, we have Rooftops in Winter. Oop, okay. Again, this is created in the Theresienstadt ghetto. Mueller, the artist, was really well known for hyper-specific detail in his pieces. Specifically, you can't see it here, but on the back, he would write really detailed descriptions of what was being shown in the piece, where it was, when it was, who may have been depicted. And besides the landscapes, he was really well known for doing art featuring the ill and the elderly, which we know experienced perhaps the worst treatment in the ghettos, but specifically in Theresienstadt. So I'll leave you with two things. First is a quote: a work of art is a world in itself, reflecting senses and emotions of the artist world. That's by the artist Hans Hofmann, and I think it's really applicable here. As we move to a reality where our survivors are no longer able to speak, their art does some speaking for them, and there's real truth and real reality in the pain and sometimes the beauty of the things that are depicted in this art. And it's important to remember what a fantastic tool it is, not only for remembrance, but for processing things that can feel too large to process. And I want to illustrate that for you here by showing you this work of art. This was created by a middle school student who we have been providing Holocaust education to throughout this past year. I just think it's beautiful. She's titled it "The Shadow." You can see in the reflection of the eye, this sign over Auschwitz. Much of what we try to do at our museum is provide education that is not traumatizing for the students, particularly people in middle school, who are just beginning to learn themes of fear and trauma and death. And art is a really incredible tool for them to process these feelings that may come up as they're learning these things, and to remember. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much, Sophie. I'm going to stop the share. All right.
Thank you so much, Katie. We are now going to turn it over to Rabbi Eli Friedman from Rodeph Shalom.
Thank you, Sophie. It's good to be with all of you this evening in memorial. In a moment, we're going to light our candles. So I'll invite you, if you have them, you can start to gather them now. I'm going to offer, though, first a traditional prayer, El Male Rachamim, a traditional prayer of mourning. And I'll invite those of you that are able to please rise. El Male Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtze Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Etorim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Nishmot Yakrenu, Shel Hachula Olamaham, Baal Harachamim, Yastirehem Beseter Kanafaf Laolamim, Bitzror hachayim et nishmatam. Adonai hu nachalatam. Ve'yanuachu v'shalom al mishkavam. V'nomar Amen. Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace to those who perished in the Holocaust. Our parents, our siblings, our rabbis and teachers, our neighbors and children, the named and the unnamed, whose lives were cut off by brutal, vicious, cunning, and calculated violence. May they find peace in the world to come. Remember the survivors who have since passed away and the virtues of our people who died at the hand of malice in every generation. We remember the work of their hands and the message of their hearts. Bless the defenders of Israel with safety and strength, and the righteous of all nations. Provide protection, shelter, and comfort to the Jewish people. Let their deeds be a source of favor in heaven and healing on earth. Put an end to anger, hatred, and fear, and lead us to a time when no one will suffer at the hand of another. Speedily in our days, may the memory of all who faced these horrors be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life, a living blessing in our midst. And let us all say, Amen. I invite you all now to light your candles, and if you're able to put it on the screen for all of us to see together as we join together as a community in memorial.
And you're welcome to say the name of the person that your card holds as you light your candles. Thank you.
In memory of Shalom Yakubovsky of Kiev, age 10.
Thank you.
In memory of Lila Yakubovsky of Lutz, age 10. Oh, they're both for this little girl.
In memory of Mota Pasiernik of Holoby, age 1.
In memory of Eterna Sapolsky, age 62.
In memory of Itzhak Weisvogel of Tarlo, who's 37.
In memory of HaShoah Ozerjansky of Kiev, age 4.
In memory of Suri Weiss of Bekis Kappa, who was murdered at Auschwitz, age 6.
In memory of Shoshana E. Ungrace of Zenger, Hungary, who was murdered at Auschwitz in 1944, age 26.
In memory of Busia Obsiavech of Kherson, who was murdered at unknown at age 5.
In memory of Mityu Yakubovich of Tori Remeti, who is age 6 when she died, when she was murdered.
In memory of Toba Patcher of Paris, who was murdered at age 41.
In memory of Berta Pecht of Austria, age 60. Next, you want to do one? Okay, I got 2 more. In memory of Hui Pakanowski of Khmelnyk, murdered, unknown, age 2. And in memory of Pesach Pak of Karlsruhe, age 58.
In memory of Herschel Steinberg of Kozolaki, who was murdered at Treblinka, age 6.
And Manlio della Torre of Firenze, who was perished at Auschwitz in 1943, aged 8.
Mama, look at the button. See?
In memory of Kasia de Lima of Unknown, who was murdered in Auschwitz, 1942, age 53.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for those who decided to say the names of the people who were named on your candle or on the insert. You can leave them lit and remember the person who was written on the insert, but also to think about all of the people, all of the others that were lost. So thank you all for coming to the program tonight. I want to thank our presenters again, Katie, I'm saying your name wrong and I'm sorry, Loie.
You're saying it right. My husband's family says it wrong.
Okay. Thank you so much for presenting. Thank you to Bernice Steinhardt and thank you, Rabbi Eli Friedman, for leading us in the candle lighting. Again, we want to thank Hammock, Rodeph Shalom, Art and Remembrance, and 3G Philly for partnering and presenting. So everyone have a good night. Please be safe and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Daddy. Hello.
Hi, you can say hi to Sophie and Esther. That's who Sophie works with. That's Sophie's boss. Say hi, Mom.
Hi, Ma.